Okay, so we're going to start with some brief introductions, so everybody knows who everyone is, and then I'm going to just introduce the kind of format and the content of the session itself. So Klara, if we can start with you, please.
Yeah, hi. I'm Klara Finnimore. I'm the Journals and E-Resources Librarian at the Royal College of Art. So I look after the sort of administration of all the subscription resources there and the journal, the print journals, the current ones, and the archive.
Hi everyone, I'm Madeleine Ahern and I'm Serials and Digital Resources Librarian at Tate. So similarly, I look after the current subscriptions for serials, e-resources, and also the historic periodicals collection.
Hi everyone, I am Ben Cornish. I am the lead metadata librarian at the Natural History Museum, and also I am a team leader on the Unlock project, which is a huge project to audit our library collections, which involves working with a lot of print serials.
Hi everyone, I'm Liz and I am a subject liaison librarian at UCL, and I work with the Slade School of Fine Art and the Art History department, but I also manage a special collection of rare periodicals, which I'm going to talk about today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer. I'm a librarian at National Museum Scotland, and I have quite a wide remit, but as part of that, it includes care of the serials collection. I'm joined by my colleague Jodie Walker on the call as well, who's only been with us not quite a month and is already on the receiving end of all of our gripes about the collections management. So we're in it together, and I'm really grateful for the invite and the welcome today from ARLIS. Thanks for having me.
Great, and I'm Eleanor Parker. I'm an assistant academic support librarian at London College of Communication, which is part of UAL. And again, like Jennifer, I've got quite a wide remit. I support various courses, but I also have responsibility for the management of our serials collection in the library itself. Okay, so this session aims to cover some of the issues that come up with serial management again and again and again, hence the title. Topics like promotion, usage, managing non-standard formats, weeding decisions, archive material, all of these I'm sure lots of people are familiar with. We're going to be talking about some of the project that we've been working on with regards to these themes, and we really want this to be an opportunity to share some of our working practices. But I really want to make it clear that we are definitely not the experts, and we really are hoping that this session is going to invite comments from people, and that people will feel confident to share their own practices, ask questions, share thoughts and their own challenges. Please don't be shy. We really want to be hosting a kind of informal and friendly space. This is not a formal kind of presentation session. We just really want this to be a sharing space. So the format, each presentation is going to be around 10 minutes, and then we're going to have 10 minutes after each presentation for questions and for sharing, which we really hope that you will join in with. Please do put your hands up if you'd like to share something on screen. We really welcome that. Or if you'd prefer to post in the chat, that would also be great. We'll have somebody monitoring the chat for questions. At the end, I'm going to finish just with a topic that I hope people will have some comments on, and then we'll have an opportunity for any questions or sharing that we didn't manage to cover earlier in the session. So if we didn't answer your question, you can post it again, or we'll have tried to keep an eye on that. Just to mention that we're going to record the presentations, but we're not going to record the discussions. So just to make everyone aware of that. Okay, so without further ado, you're kind of stuck with me for the next 10 minutes or so. I'm going to present first of all. So let me just share my screen. Great. Cool. Okay. And get started. My presentation this morning is titled Trial by Shelving. And it is about, as you can see, kind of experimenting with location of the journals in the library. Now, what I was wanting to do today is just a really practical account of this very mini project that I did last term. It is not a gold standard by any means. I really welcome any comments, any solutions, any suggestions that people might have. So yeah, just to make that clear. Oh, is that going to, sorry. Okay. Right. So starting out, we, as I suspect most people do, want our students to be able to use our collections as a space for creative discovery, as well as for research purposes. And this includes our collection of journal back copies, which is quite a big collection. It's got a huge range of different images, formats, design ideas, historical advertising, all sorts of things that we think our students would be interested in. Like many academic libraries, we have a bright display of our current print journals, which you can see at the top of the screen there, with seating to support browsing and reading, and it's all a very nice area. And in an ideal world, and I know that probably quite a few people do have this set up, where we would love to have those kind of journal cabinets with the storage that you lift up, and you've got the, the back copies, the recent back copies underneath. And I've put just a picture in the bottom there if you don't know what I'm talking about. But sadly, we don't have the budget for that at the moment. We don't have the space, and we have to make do with what we've got, which is the fact that the back copies of our current subscriptions and any kind of cancelled older subscription copies are shelved right at the back of the library. They don't have very much passing traffic, and they also are housed in rolling stacks, which I know the mechanism to operate those can be a real barrier for people. So how to promote to students what we think could be a real fantastic source of material for kind of serendipitous discovery and creative inspiration is a really long-standing issue. How to encourage students to use this collection. Oh, thank you for whoever said strong emoji game. Yeah, Emoji Kitchen, guys, Emoji Kitchen. Okay, so then I was at the ARLIS conference in 2023 in Norwich, which I'm sure lots of people were at, and we presented at one of our serials committee events, and I was having a chat to librarians afterwards, and I had a very lovely conversation with a librarian who I cannot remember their name, and I cannot remember where they were based, so apologies if that was you. And they said, oh, well, we've moved all of our journals, all of our back copies of our journals and magazines into our main shelving, and we've also made them borrowable. And you can see from my emoji on the screen that, like, I was like, wow, that's amazing. Yes, that would totally solve the solution. That would be the solution to the serial promotion problem. Just change the location of the serials. Why didn't I think of that before? Or, wow, it was one of those kind of revelatory moments. And I came back to work. I was kind of all fired up. I was thinking about this idea. Like, could we do anything like this? Could we manage to do this? But obviously, it's not a quick and easy solution to move all of the back copies into the main collection. We certainly didn't have enough room on the main shelves to house all the serials and all the back copies. And so if we couldn't fit them all on, could we move some of them? Could we choose some subjects, but which subjects? Where would they best fit into the collection? Which class marks should they live at? Should we move all of the titles for a certain subject? Should we just move our current subscriptions? Should we move all the kind of cancelled subscriptions? Anyway, all of these questions I was, thinking about and kind of sitting on for quite a while. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to do something about this. So I'm the course librarian for several of the BA screen courses at LCC. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to start with a trial of the film and TV journals and magazines. It really made sense to me to use this collection because it's a distinct subject area, and the majority of material for those subjects is in one Dewey run. So it sits in the same place in the library. So it would be really easy to place those journals in the library shelving. I decided to just move only the current print subscription. So that was 6 titles that you can see on the screen. And I was also, after some debate, decided just to move a few years issues for each of the titles. So I chose 3 years, and that would include the current year. So all of those issues from the past 3 years. And I felt that this kind of met the objective of positioning the serials as browsing material on the library shelf. And it worked in a really similar fashion to the journal display, the storage cabinets that I was mentioning before, where you've got the previous issues in that little storage selection. So that the recent issues are easier to access. So I had some debate with myself about where to put each title on the shelf. I was thinking, should I put all of the journals at the start of the run? Should I put them at the end of the run? Should I put them somewhere in the middle? But a couple of the titles are really easy to place in the Dewey sequence. So animation and televisual really, fit obviously with the animation section, which is quite big, and with the television section, which was also quite big. So in the end, I decided to put each title next to similar material and hope that each title was kind of obvious enough to the users that they would spot them if they were wandering along the shelves, if they were looking for a specific title, that they would see them. You can see what they look like on my shelves there. So Cineast, I put in next to American Film. Screen and Film Quarterly, I put in Film Theory. And Journal of Moving Image, I put next to the art film sections. So I wanted to make it very easy for anyone to locate the particular journal and also the particular issue of a journal if they were looking for a specific issue or a specific article. And I also wanted to make it really easy for the shelving team to know where the different issues lived. I wanted to stop I didn't want to create any confusion for anyone trying to shelve things. So I tried to make the signs as clear as possible. I put the year dates in whiteboard pen because they were going to change each year. And I also put class mark reference for exact shelf location. So you could go to that exact place on the shelf and know that you'd find the journal there. What I also did, and you can see in the first photo on the screen, that I included a title summary and a signpost to the rest of the run in the rolling stacks. And I felt like this met the objective of kind of promoting the journal title itself, explaining to students just what was covered in the journal, what type of journal it was, and also promoting the rest of the back copies that were still housed in the rolling stacks in the back of the library. What I did once I've put the signs up is I had a walk around with one of our library assistants who had also been a previous shelver, and she also happened to have been a previous film practice student. So I felt like she met all the criteria, and we walked around and just she kind of made sure that, yes, that makes sense. That makes sense. This sign would lead you to this place. Okay, and then this was my attempt to collect some data. We all are in agreement that data collection is very important. So what I did was I put a QR code up to a Google form in the hope that people who were using the journals would be able to just fill in this very quick and easy form. I got 5 responses. So I was pretty pleased with that, actually. I felt like, yeah, okay, 5 people have been bothered to fill out my form. And I also, you can see on the other photo there, I just did a tick survey for the shelvers. I did that for 2 weeks, and I just wanted them to tick when they reshelved the journals. So it's really difficult collecting this kind of data. If anyone's got any advice for me on how better to do it, that would be great. It's really hard to kind of rely on users taking time to complete any kind of form like that. So I was, as I said, quite happy with what I got. I also have to confess that we didn't have any, so it was really limited ability to kind of judge the success of this trial because we didn't have any baseline data. I hadn't done any previous data collection from before I started the trial, which was a shame. But that's sometimes life. But anecdotal feedback from people was really good. So I shared what I'd done with all of the screen courses, staff and students in induction sessions rather, and any course committees that I'd been to. And the feedback from people was really positive. I did consider something like a Moodle poll might be an option for students, but anyway, I haven't got around to that point. Okay, so what's next for the trial? once I had made the decisions about what material to move and where to place the different titles, the whole process was really quick and easy to action. The signs didn't take me long to make, and they could easily be made for different journal titles. So I felt that this trial is a really cheap and kind of straightforward way of making the back copies of serials more discoverable, easier to browse, and potentially more useful as source material for students. And it was a good alternative to, like I said, those specific cabinets which do the same thing, but obviously not everybody can have access to those. The main issue with rolling it out to the other core subjects is the placement of titles within the Dewey one, which is one of the things that I mentioned before, was something that I'd been thinking about. Film and TV was a real no-brainer because it's a distinct Dewey area, but a lot of other subjects for different courses are spread around the collection, which makes kind of trying to decide where you're going to put those different journal titles quite tricky. But there are some subjects that are easier than others. So something like photography or sound arts or illustration, most of those titles live in the same place. So that is my aim, would be to roll the trial out to those specific areas. So that's the end of my presentation and my trial. I would really be interested to hear from if anyone else has done anything similar or anything different that is, that it has attempted to look at the placement of journals in the library in order to promote them to students.
You can see that all right.
Brilliant, Elle. Thank you. You have some questions already.
Right, so yeah,
in the
I'm
chat.
Madeleine, and I'm Serials and Digital Resources Librarian at Tate, and sort of speaking in the same vein as Elle, actually, about promotion. One of the many challenges that face us librarians is how to encourage the use of underused resources in our collections. So I'm going to be speaking about a project I began this past fall to design a LibGuide to promote artist serials at Tate, which I saw to be an underused but incredible part of the library's rare serials collection. So here's a brief overview of what I'll cover, including what constitutes an artist serial, the challenge that led to doing this project, LibGuides as a solution to address that, the process of thinking through and then designing the LibGuide, as well as other unexpected considerations that arose in the process. So just to start with, what is an artist serial? When you think about serials, what first comes to mind might be quarterly academic journals produced by major publishers on the history of art or art movements, or maybe monthly high-gloss visual magazines with articles on contemporary artists, the art market, or current exhibitions, mass-produced, regular, and in a familiar bound format. Artist serials are, however, a distinct type of artist publication, as from the outset, artists producing serials have disrupted assumptions about serial format and toyed with conventions around their production. So that, many play with serial format, content, means of production, distribution, such that these titles cease to be about works of art, but to themselves become them. So artist serials emerged following the popularity of art periodicals in the late 18th and 19th centuries, and the little magazines, which I think Liz will be speaking about later, of the 20th, and continue to be an important format for artists to display and curate their works beyond a gallery wall. So Tate's collection of rare serials includes hundreds of these sorts of artist serials, which track the history of serial publishing in Britain and internationally. So the challenge. The challenge with the artist serials collection at Tate is that it's little used compared to some of our other collections, such as solo and group exhibition catalogs, monographs, artist books, and the previously mentioned magazines and academic journals. Additionally, the titles are not easily findable on the library catalog, nor has a comprehensive bibliography or analysis of them been done previously. The artist serials in the collection are incredibly unique and important items, many of them being produced by major 20th century artists with very limited print runs where only a few issues circulated to relatively few people or institutions. We're lucky enough to have many of these early titles thanks to former librarians from Tate Library, specifically Elizabeth Bell, who was at Tate from the 60s to 90s, who was really tapped into this network of artists at the time and was proactive about acquiring serials on behalf of Tate. So this is incredibly lucky for us now, and also gives us the responsibility to seek to make them as accessible as possible, as they are works of art in their own right, and have significant potential both for the research of external readers as well as internal staff to continue to support our exhibitions, displays, and research. So the solution, LibGuides. The solution to address this question of how best to promote the titles presented itself in LibGuides, a library content management system I'm sure many of you are familiar with, as it's used by libraries globally to create select and sometimes comprehensive bibliographies of resources in library collections. Tate Library currently has a couple of live LibGuides, which are on the screen here on the right. And although we are a small library team, we are currently working to build more guides when we can. So creating a LibGuide to promote artist serials fit into this team-wide effort. LibGuides provides a great platform to curate library resources in one place that maybe the catalog doesn't link particularly well, or to explore a topic or medium that you as a librarian think warrants particular attention. So deciding to create a LibGuide for the collection immediately raised a few questions for me about how best to organize all of these titles and this information, such that the guide would be most useful for readers. So the end goals for the guide are that through it, I promote artist serials specifically within the Rare Serials collection, provide a starting point for further research into the titles I've selected, but also hopefully inspire readers to continue exploring our collections beyond the ones that I've included, and by extension, motivate readers to actually visit Tate Library and consult the titles firsthand, as we are open to the public by appointment and welcome use of the collection. So the stages of designing the LibGuide began for me with conceptualization, considering why this LibGuide should be made and who it would serve, which I've already discussed, before turning to how to harness all the potential titles into a useful structure. I chose to set some boundaries to prevent the LibGuide from growing and growing in scope, as it's potentially quite an unwieldy remit. We're talking about hundreds of titles just in Tate's collection alone. So my LibGuide begins post-war, 1950s onwards, and tracks up to the present day, including some titles that we still acquire. It's not completely comprehensive, as I'm not trying to replicate the catalog, but just to pull out some titles by decade that, from my research and consultation with colleagues, proved to be of particular note for someone researching artist serials in each period. So this leads on to the research phase, in which I read as much as I could on artist serials using the secondary literature I've included on the introduction to the LibGuide page, and there are screenshots of that on the screen here. Every couple of years, there's a new book published that addresses the topic of artist serials, and there are many, many more on artist publishing, as I'm sure lots of you are aware. So I was able to add some of these relevant titles to the LibGuide as I was researching. The other simultaneous way I was researching to make the guide was spending time in the stacks, looking at every rare serial title we hold. And this helped me find serials with unique formats, packaging, design elements, and content. Part of the need for doing this came from the bare nature of some of the artist serials catalog records, and that leads to something I'll discuss in the other benefits section of my presentation. So the actual building of the LibGuide. Due to time, I'm not going to get into a lot of specifics about the process of actually constructing it, but I've included some links at the end of this presentation, which are helpful sources from within the LibGuides community about how you can create one. It's a very collaborative community, and you can use the sort of building blocks of other libraries' pages to inspire yours. And that's very much encouraged in the LibGuide community. But I will say I've chose to divide the serials I was including by decade in order to highlight at least 5, but this number I'm sure will grow per decade. And this meant I was able to research each title in a bit of depth. So I've opted to also write little summaries of artist serials for each decade, as well as include links into the main Tate website, as well as I'm planning to link to the archive catalog as well, where relevant, because that is separate from the library one. So this leads to my final 3 points on designing your LibGuide. The first of which is to consult with colleagues about what they think you're missing in order for the guide to benefit from their expertise as well. Secondly is to consider imaginative digital features you could include to engage the viewer with the serials, like videos or digitization of a particular issue, obviously if copyright is cleared, and other interactive features. And finally, and I think this is perhaps the most key takeaway I have in regards to LibGuides, is the value it offers in its ability to be an organic and editable resource. So it can expand as your collection expands, and your work on it can be ongoing. It doesn't need to be fixed in time. I think it's useful to plan to add more titles and, yes, have a solid base of titles right from when you first launch it, but plan to add more. This guide isn't published yet, as to date I've only finished a couple of pages, but I plan to publish it later this year. So some other benefits of doing a project like this is that you can do other simultaneous projects that might save you time in the long term. So for me, it was aligning the timing of selecting serials for the guide while running a rehousing project of all the rare serials. So you can see the before and after that project on the screen here. Because I was physically looking at each title in order to move it, I was getting a rare opportunity to assess each one as it went into a new box. So I was able to work with our stores manager and officer to do this, and that was amazing help. I'm really grateful for that. So projects like this can also be a great opportunity for collaborative work. Other benefits when building a LibGuide like this are potential spin-off projects that will present themselves as you find problems that you want to solve or as you're inspired to improve other aspects of the collection. So for me, that was realizing that the artist serials catalog records need enhancing next, as well as where there are gaps in title runs. So now I know what to keep an eye out for in terms of future acquisitions. So yeah, thank you all very much for listening. I hope that's inspired you to maybe make a LibGuide with an underused collection in your library that you're keen to promote. And I'm happy to take any questions. These are the resources I mentioned with the LibGuides community pages.
Okay, so full
Thanks very
disclosure
much.
here, I'm actually going to talk more about problems than solutions today, but hopefully I can get some good ideas that I can copy off everyone, and I'm really inspired to start using LibGuides better. And just as a little aside, I think sometimes in universities it can be difficult to just create new LibGuides because they're quite locked down and we have to go through a full process to get more, but I think it's a really great solution to this sort of material. Anyway, right, so little magazines or experimental, independently published literature and visual art magazines, and specifically those published from the early 1960s onwards, were described in 1971 by the author, publisher, and compiler of many small press directories and bibliographies, Len Fulton, as a librarian's nightmare. And we've been dealing with this nightmare ever since we started collecting such material. So today I'm going to consider the challenges presented by these bibliographically and materially erratic publications that led to Fulton making this statement, challenges that librarians are still facing some 60 years later and still attempting to apply some semblance of order to these chaotic publications. So in 2025, UCL is celebrating 60 years of small press collecting. Two very astute librarians in 1964, Ian Angus, the deputy librarian, and Geoffrey Saw, the English librarian, realised that no institutions were collecting the self-published, non-commercial, experimental literature and art magazines that were emerging from the so-called mimeograph revolution. They secured funding from the library budgets, placed their first subscriptions with the first titles arriving in the library in January 1965. And their ambitious aim was to collect all English language little magazines being published across the UK, North America, parts of Europe, and the Commonwealth. And we've been collecting ever since. And now the collections extend to more than 5,000 little magazine titles. So these are independently published experimental literature and visual art titles, all of them non-commercial. And the Poetry Store, which is a related collection, it's more than 20,000 items now, and that includes poetry publications, artist books, all sorts of experimental text, and edition books and other things in lots of different formats, so posters, cards, objects, etc. And we'll have a look at some of those in a second. And then the last collection is the countercultural magazines, which are newspapers and newsletters, and these tend to be more political than literary in content. So here's a typical magazine in our collections, and one that encapsulates many of the problems faced. And I'm just going to go through a few of those problems. This is an issue of Jeff Nuttall's My Own Mag, self-published and printed using a mimeograph machine in March 1964. So it's an awkward foolscap size. This fits the stencils of 1960s mimeograph machines, but it's very awkward for modern archival folder sizes. As is typical of avant-garde self-published magazines of the period, it is simply and cheaply bound using staples, and now these staples are rusting, damaging not only this magazine, but those that sit next to it in the archival folder or box. The unidentified staining is actually a deliberate design feature. So did Nuttall spill his tea on it and just like what happened, or is it something worse? I guess we won't know without some sort of analysis. The cheap acidic mimeograph paper has become frail and deteriorates with every handling. Many of the 1960s newsprint items in our collections are literally crumbling before our eyes. This deliberately torn section of the cover, again, a conscious design feature, makes the magazine actually quite annoying to handle and to read. It flaps about and gets caught on stuff, but this is an intentional challenge to the reader. Limited, sometimes non-existent bibliographic information is common. How is the librarian supposed to record and apply order to this stuff? The notion of sequential numbering and standard subscription models are not only completely alien, but irregularity is an intentional disruption, making systematic purchasing impossible. How many issues should you expect, and when should you expect them? Incomplete holdings are then the norm in this sort of collection. Jeff Nuttall famously deliberately disrupted the numbering on My Own Mag, so much so that even Nuttall scholars can't decide on the correct sequence. One of those scholars, Jed Birmingham, refers to My Own Mag as bibliographically ridiculous. Likewise, the content can be intentionally complex and difficult to categorize. Is it art or is it literature? Is it some sort of hybrid thing that falls in between those areas? And without in-depth knowledge of the item in hand, applying subject headings to a catalogue record can be a time-consuming process, and multiply that by thousands and thousands of different issues. And of course, these challenging material and bibliographic qualities can be matched by equally challenging or even offensive content. And how do we record that? But these are teaching collections intended to be handled. From a conservation perspective, should we clean or not clean, mend or not mend? Here is issue 1 of Assembling magazine, subtitled A Collection of Otherwise Unpublishable Manuscripts, published in New York from 1970, compiled by Henry Korn and Richard Kostelanetz. And as you can see, our copy looks pretty grubby. We actually have 2 copies of this magazine, as we'll find out. But obviously, artist magazines and experimental literature in serial form was produced to be circulated, handled, and read. The work is only activated via this process of distribution. The grime accumulated via this process can be considered an important part of this life cycle. So if we subject them to any sort of cleaning or repair, are we then erasing an important aspect of the work? And additionally, institutional stamps and marks indicate a journey throughout the institution's collections. 1960s and 70s librarians, I can tell you, were very enthusiastic stampers. So here's the conservation dilemma in action. Assembling, an influential artist magazine, adhering to a Duchampian democracy of display, no selection process or editing, contributions were just stapled together simply in alphabetical order. The stapling, a characteristic feature of experimental publications of the mimeograph revolution, for assembling is a utilitarian structural feature of this artwork as print object that speaks directly to its lo-fi values. At some point, a library worker snagged a finger on one of the rusting staples, took it to the conservator, who removed said staples and replaced them with thread, thus irreparably disrupting an important material feature of the publication. And what would you have done in this situation? I'd like to hear your views on this. We do at least still have the staples. Here is a copy of Ben Vautier's Fluxus Assemblage Object, Magazine in a Bottle 4-2, self-published in 1968. I mean, I say self-published, I don't think you would get anything like this commercially published. Awkward three-dimensional formats such as this not particularly uncommon in our collections for sure, and I'm sure in the Tate as well, can disrupt standard storage arrangements. So how do these sit in a sequence of standard codex print objects? If they're too large to even sit on a shelf, what then? I mean, in our poetry store recently, we bought a beehive. So make of that what you will. This can result in multiple locations and sequences emerging, which can become really confusing over time. So particularly for our collection, it's a collection that's evolved over decades and over that time has been fit into various spaces in various locations. And it's become subject to multiple classification sequences that have evolved over the years in response to these changing storage spaces and in an attempt to sort of corral these various material elements and sizes and formats. Our current closed access storage renders items invisible to the browsing user. The collections currently consist of over 800 of these large archive boxes on rolling stacks. The collections are still growing, so we're constantly shifting stuff around to make more space, even though we ran out of space long ago. With closed access stores, one is more reliant on the library catalogue to interrogate the collections. Old catalogue records, i.e. information imported from a card catalogue in the early 1980s, do not describe the items in a very useful way for modern users. Often they do not record more than the most basic bibliographic information, let alone material and visual characteristics. Here's a catalogue record for a magazine called Virgula, published in Brazil, unknown date, 22 centimetres, text in Portuguese. And this is a typical record for our older rare serials. But in reality, this is what it looks like. It's a beautiful loose leaf Brazilian process poetry magazine, a form of visual poetry related to concrete poetry, and existed briefly for a single issue in 1972. The cover is the envelope in which it arrived with all its annotations. So we're in the process also of enhancing our records, but it's a very slow process. And anyway, how do you record the many and varied qualities of a magazine when every issue of a single title is potentially different, completely different from its predecessor? Which brings me back to assembling issue 1. How does one make discoverable the individual artworks contained in a rare artist's magazine? This is one of the biggest challenges of our collections. How do researchers actually discover the content of rarely indexed artist magazines? So actually assembling it is unusual in that it is digitized in Independent Voices database, which you can access via JSTOR, but that's quite a rare occurrence. So this issue of assembling contains individual artworks by 42 different artists, including Ed Ruscha's Greasy Smear of Chocolate. These are legitimate works of art, texts, poems hidden in a self-published magazine that is in turn hidden in the archive box, which is in turn hidden in the closed access store, and where catalogue records are minimal at best. Needless to say, I'd be interested to hear how others have approached this particular problem. So I'm going to end there, but just a quick advert. We're going to be doing lots of events over the course of the next year to celebrate 60 years of small press at UCL. The first one is on the 19th of February, details here, but obviously happy to take any questions now that you might have.
So, as I already said, I'm the Journals and E-Resources Librarian at the Royal College of Art. So I'm just going to share a bit today about my experience so far looking after the print journal collection there since I started my role in 2019. I'll just give a bit of context first about RCA and the collection and then go through some of the challenges that we've had and how we've been dealing with them so far. It's definitely very much work in progress. Oh, I thought that was going to click on. There we go. So this is us. We are postgrad only and quite small by university standards, so about 2,500 FTE. We were founded in 1837, and actually about a sixth of the titles in the journal collection are from the 1800s. We have slightly more diverse interests than I think a lot of people guess from the name. We've, as well as our sort of 4 schools across art and design, we also have some research centres doing things like inclusive design, robotics and materials design. And we do have special collections separate from the main library. I'm aware that some smaller libraries sometimes don't, but we do. But special collections mostly contains material related to the activities and the history of the college. So things like the work of alumni and members of staff. So actually the older books and journals in the collection sort of remain part of the main library collection. So this is our storage for journals. Everything older than around 5 years is held in 4 sort of closed access storage rooms, which are actually at the back of the library. Sorry, just omitting somebody. And then the more recent sort of 4 to 5 years are held in the journal room. So that's part of the main library, and that's accessible to users all the time. So when I started and was introduced to this collection, really all of this space was full. So the challenge was to create some space. The journal room was full because the stores were full and we couldn't move things out of the journal room into the stores. So we had to evaluate what we had in the stores and make some decisions to make the collection more manageable, to create some space for continuing runs coming out of the journal room, ideally in the right places. We also had to make the space functional, sort of both in terms of looking after the materials correctly, but also being able to find them when we needed them. So this was where we started deciding how to reduce our holdings. So what we did was we exported all the journal holdings out of the catalogue into a spreadsheet, and that's what we've been using ever since to sort of track information and decisions that we've made for each title. The first sort of wave of disposal decisions that we made was definitely the easiest because we had a couple of really quite long runs of things that were not really like core interest. So those are quick wins for us to part with and create some space. And then the next stage was looking at titles that we knew were of interest, but where maybe online access or access through other libraries would be enough. So we sort of went through that spreadsheet and we did some checking of what was online, what was elsewhere. And we did that checking using JISC Library Hub Discover. Obviously, I should mention we don't have any insight. We acknowledge that we don't have any insight about other places' holdings priorities. So we were more confident to part with something if it was held a lot of places elsewhere, or particularly if it was held under the sort of UKRR scheme through the British Library. Yeah, so we felt more confident to part with things if that was the case. So after collecting that information into our spreadsheet, then we could sort of filter and focus in on what we wanted to look at each time. So we did decide on a few more runs to part with at this point, but there were still some things that we did have online, and we still felt actually more comfortable to keep the print because we felt they were core to the collection. As well as using the spreadsheet, we did also quite often just go in the rooms and have a look around and sort of really think just have a look at what is taking up the space, and then we come back to the spreadsheet and be like, oh well, this thing that's taking up lots of shelves, let's have another look. Was it online? Was it somewhere else? So for that reason, the longer runs have had a lot more sort of scrutiny than the shorter runs. In terms of the actual logistics of disposing of things, we have given some to the British Library, we've recycled some, we've given some away. We didn't spend much time considering offsite storage. We felt we were keen to avoid the commitment on cost and just not convinced that it was worth it for us. So we're currently at a stage where we've made some good progress, but there's more to be done. We've assessed and made decisions on a lot of the longer runs, but about a third of the titles in the collection are ones that we only hold 1 to 2 years of. So now there's much more work to be done to gain back each little bit of shelf space. I also kind of feel that there should be an answer to, is it useful or not very useful to have 2 years of something? But of course, some of those holdings might be really important. Sometimes holding a couple of years of something is holding a complete set. So it's important that we that we're conscious of that information going in, but that will be part of the next task, is to part with some smaller runs probably. Right, so another challenge was actually how we were storing the journals, particularly for the more recent collections, which are less likely to be bound. So we'd used paper bags in the past, but as you can probably see, they were not really doing their job anymore. So we chose some new boxes for storage. We had to consider obviously the cost, the durability, and also the weight of them when they're full. We have some in the stores which, when they're full of journals, they're really super heavy. So we settled on these ones that you can see. They probably are a little bit sort of, they're not quite durable enough if we were getting them on and off the shelf really regularly, but we're not. So we're quite happy that that sort of meets our requirements at the moment. So another thing was sort of the actual arrangement in the stores. So sections of it were in alphabetical order, but I think it had just sort of got all a bit muddled. So there was, I have deliberately chosen a tidy picture. I couldn't, there's images that I couldn't share on here because it's just not, yeah, it's not tidy yet. But this one is. So yeah, everything did need a tidy up. The generally downstairs in the downstairs stores is the more recent stuff, and upstairs is the older stuff and the bound stuff. So looking first at the downstairs rooms, it was already split into a run of continuing titles, and then after that a run of non-continuing titles. So we've kept those two separate runs and just sort of tidied them up. And obviously the run of continuing titles also ideally needs a little bit of space at the end of each title for stuff to come out of the journal room each year. So that reorganization in those rooms has been going really well. My colleague who's been doing a lot of this beautiful tidying has also been transferring most of the journals out of those paper bags and into the boxes at the same time as getting them in the right sequence. So that's going really well. The upstairs is definitely more still work in progress. These ones are also not really in order. And I was all ready to go in and say, let's get these in alphabetical order. But then I attended some training that said, actually it can be better to organize older material by size so that it doesn't so that if two things the same size are sat next to each other, it sort of protects them from warping rather than if you have like a taller thing next to a shorter thing. The conservation of the material is not something that we focused on a lot in the past, and I don't think we really have the resource to start investing a lot in it now either. The stores aren't sort of environmentally controlled in any way, but they do remain a low temperature throughout the year, and I heard that it was big fluctuations that are the biggest issue. So it's definitely a future goal to look more about what we can be doing with conservation. But for now, I think organising the material is the priority. So if we're not organising alphabetically, what we'll do is we'll add shelf numbers to the catalogue records to sort of enable retrieval. So you can see in one of these images, we've got some shelf numbers. So just super quickly, because I know I'm running a bit to time. We also have a LibGuide. It's really not got any sort of summaries on it yet, which I think maybe we should add, having seen Madeleine's presentation. But we do have some images, cover images for the current print subscriptions and highlights from the historical collection. So it's just to try and increase the visibility. We're also trying to improve the catalogue records because they're really quite basic at the moment. And we did have an opportunity at one point to have a display of historical material from the archive as well. So that's nice to sort of increase awareness. So reflecting on what we have done so far, I think it has been good progress, but just a little bit slower than I would like for lots of different reasons. I did create a document to get some detail down of sort of the end goals of the project so that I could try and work backwards and break the tasks down into smaller chunks, but I still find it really challenging. So any tips are very welcome. And yeah, future goals are thinking more about conservation, thinking more about promotion and access, and maybe also writing some sort of detailed policy to guide our decision making in the future on what we retain and what we dispose of. So yeah, okay, thank you very much for listening. I'm going to stop sharing and stop recording. And
Cool. Do you want to kick off?
Okay, yeah. So hi everyone, I'm Miriam. Thanks very much for having me. I work with Ben at the Natural History Museum, and we're going to be talking about our work on the NHM Unlocked project, which is a big museum and library-wide project to audit collections ready for move to a new site. And we're going to be focusing on the serials aspect of that audit because that's been quite a lot of the work that we've done so far. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the library and then a bit about the project and our audit process. And then we're going to talk about and kind of reflect on a few challenges or things that we've encountered because we're at roughly the halfway point of the project now. So to start off, if my slides will move. Here we go. Have my slides moved? Excellent. So the Natural History Museum Library and Archives is based at the Natural History Museum in London. And the majority of the material is at the main museum site in South Kensington, and it's spread kind of all over the buildings. But there's also material held at the museum's other kind of public engagement site at Tring, and then also in a off-site store that's owned by the museum, and then also in off-site storage at Boston Spa. So there's about 23,000 meters of material across all of those sites. And we're working on, for the project, something like 45% of that. So the subjects that the library covers are kind of all around natural history, so botany, zoology, paleontology. And the main users are museum staff. So the museum employs about 300 member scientists, like zoologists and botanists and ornithologists who are actively doing scientific research. And there's also master students, PhD students. So those are the main users of the collection. But the museum library is also open to the public 3 days a week via appointment. So those full collections are available to the public for access. The library is structured around kind of large subject libraries. So there's like this image here is the Earth Sciences Library, there's a botany library, there's a zoology library, but also smaller sectional libraries. So those are quite specific, probably about a specific taxa. So there's a mammals library, there's a mollusk library, there's a ferns library. So those are a lot smaller, and they can vary from about 100 meters of material to maybe a single shelf. So there's different kind of collection management challenges there with collections held all over museum buildings and also in kind of units that vary quite a lot in size. To talk kind of specifically about the serials in the collection, there are 7 large serials collections across the museum, and they are sort of distinct because the whole like museum library collection has only really been managed as one collection by one team for like about 20 years. Before it, there was a botany library team, a paleontology library team, a zoology library team. And so a lot of what we're dealing with is kind of the legacy of that and the fact that the resources have been managed by different people and in slightly different ways. So there's about 5,000 meters of serials in total and about 30,000 titles. It is a historic run, but we do still get new print issues in. In the last month, we've had about 260, and those are either via purchase or via exchange relationships. So the museum produces publications, and then we exchange those with other organizations who kind of work in the disciplines we're interested in, who send us theirs as well. So the NHM Unlocked project, which is what Ben and I work on, is a museum-wide project to build a new science and digitization centre in Thames Valley Science Park near Reading. So there's a big move both of specimen collections and of library collections to that new site. And so we're preparing collections to move basically. So as part of that, we're auditing everything that's on shelf, which is monographs, serials, and maps mostly. So there's a whole team of us who work on the library side. There's 8 of us at the moment, but at the kind of height we had 11 and a half full-time equivalent. And then there's also a team, or a much larger team, who are working on the move of the specimen collections. So that's like the taxidermy, shells, pinned insects, all of that kind of stuff. And then here at the bottom, we've just got our lovely shiny stats that we trot out whenever anyone likes to see our lovely shiny stats. And here you can see in that items created, we've made about 98,000 new items and added them to the library management system. And the majority of those are individual serial parts. So our serials are loanable, but our collection only circulates to museum staff, so it's within a relatively controlled environment, but most of the collection is self-service, and once we've barcoded items, people can check them out using a smartphone app if they want to take them back to their offices to work on them. So I thought I'd just really quickly run over the process that we're using to audit the serials, and partly to show off these really lovely drawings that one of our audit assistants did to illustrate our process. So the first thing we need to do is to locate the items. We try and create a list from our library management system of everything that should be on shelf in a collection, but as I'm sure you will appreciate, that's not always completely straightforward, because our metadata is quite inconsistent in places. So we allocate each one of our audit assistants, who are the people who do the actual processing, a section of the serials collection to work on, and then they need to go to the shelf and find that and pull off everything in that area. Hopefully that will all be on the list that they've given them, but there might be things on the shelf that are not on the list, and there might be things listed that are not on the shelf. So we pull everything off in that area, and then also look at if there's any on-shelf notes that are in place or any items that are on loan. So if before a collection's been audited and barcoded, we do a manual loan for serials. So people fill in something called a bookboard, which is where they fill in their name and details of the part that they've borrowed. So we pull everything off, and then the first thing we do is to do conservation checks on the material. So we have a book conservator for the project, and then the audit assistants undertake basic conservation themselves. So things like rehousing into boxes or into Melanex sleeves or doing ties, but anything kind of more in depth, they add notes in, and then the book conservator can work through that. Kind of she follows behind us as we work through the collection. And then once someone's pulled a title off, they go onto the library management system, try and pull up the record or records that are associated with it. It's, as you all know, it's very rare that a serial just has like one tidy bib record that completely makes sense and totally matches what you have. So they find any records that are relevant and then make quite basic updates to the bib record. So we've kind of set a minimum standard, which is mindful of the amount of material we have to get through and the amount of time that we have to do it. But I'd say our audit assistants take quite a lot of pride in making those bibs as useful as possible. And we're really conscious that as the museum spreads out more over more sites, it's more and more important that people can access catalogue records that help them understand the material, because currently they can be quite reliant on going to the shelf, but that might not be possible when the material is based at a different site. And then we also update holdings information. So that's making sure that serials are located to their correct collection at their correct site. And that is all kind of as it should be. And then the next stage is to barcode each individual item. So we do this via spreadsheets that we then we used to do this via spreadsheets that we then uploaded into ALMA, so it's not necessary to create each item directly into the library management system. You can do that via an Excel sheet and then upload that via a job. But Ben has recently created a process where we use the ALMA API to update ALMA live from a spreadsheet. So that's a lot less labor intensive than doing it directly into the library management system, but it also means that you can make use of things like the data validation that's available in Excel. So our barcodes have got 9 digits. If someone puts in a 10-digit number, it'll flag up and tell them that there's an error there. So we found that a really efficient way of doing this kind of at scale. So we barcode each individual item, relabel the items if we need to, and make sure that they're looking as neat and tidy as they can be, and then we return them to the shelves. So that's kind of a summary of our process. And we're now going to talk about, I think we've got 3 separate sort of challenges that we've been thinking about for the project.
Thanks, Miriam. I know we're very close to time already, so I'll just absolutely rattle through this. But yeah, one of the things is that something of a unique issue to the museum is that over the many years that the catalogue has existed, museum cataloguers have made records for individual articles in print serials. We have something like 36,000 of these bibliographic records for articles, and there's a big challenge in that these things often don't actually sit in relation to the serials that they're part of. So if you find one of these things in the catalogue, it can be very challenging to actually then find it physically on the shelf. So that's a big issue, and we've been working with the local kind of AI team here to try and do kind of lots of fancy string matching to try and like relate these records and add in the requisite 773 link, which is a bibliographic field, which will then like link these things in the catalog, which means that if you find them there, you can actually find them on the shelf. So that's one thing that we've done. Do you want to move on to the next slide? The other thing is looking at sort of serial adjacent material. So there's a quote that I love, which used to be in the Science Reference Library, which is anything is a serial until proven otherwise. And that's definitely something they've taken to heart at the museum. So there's lots and lots of things that like wouldn't necessarily traditionally be considered a serial, but are held in the serials collection. So that's things like conference proceedings, monographs and series. Most monographs and series are held as serials, which can be really confusing because most people would actually probably think of them as monographic. That's the sort of key aspect of them. So yeah, and there's also things like annual reports. Lots of our maps are serialized as well. So there's, yeah, the challenge of trying to think about how to deal with the fact that we are meeting this situation as it is, dealing with a lot of these historic decisions, which you wouldn't necessarily make now if you were doing it again. But yeah, trying to work with like being sympathetic to how things were done in the past, but also trying to think about how we could change things to make it easier for people to find this material in the future. So yeah.
And then I'll just really quickly talk a little bit about duplicate runs and unique content that we've come across in the serial collections. So as we're doing this big audit, there's a need to kind of review and rationalize collections, and there is some duplication between the different serial collections, partly because they were managed separately by different teams until quite recently. And then also when you're doing an audit project, you obviously become quite mindful of the space and the resource needed to audit and move collections and think about, do we need to maintain the collection as it is now, or are there any decisions that we could make? But we do have significant holdings of pre-20th century journals and journals that have got quite interesting provenance, say runs that were owned by really eminent scientists. And so we do have to do shelf by shelf comparison of some runs before we can decide that they are truly duplicates of each other. So a couple of things that we've come across are the presence of hand-colored plates in journals. So this plate is from the Proceedings of the Zoological Society. I think we have 5 runs of this within the museum, but for the early years the plates are hand painted. And so these the one on the far left is from Biodiversity Heritage Library, that's the copy at the Smithsonian, and then the next 2 along are from 2 of our runs at the NHM. And these shells are hand colored, and so there are differences in the images which might be really useful for scientists to look at to compare the different specimens, because these are type specimens of these shells. These particular shells were described in 1858 and collected by H. Cumming, and they were actually later acquired by the museum. And so the pictures that the photographs you can see on the right are from our specimen database. So there's, alongside the work that we're doing, there's also a massive project of digitizing all of the museum specimens. And so the images from within this serial aren't just an image of the type specimen of that shell, they're of something that the museum actually owns. And so if a curator receives an inquiry about this specific specimen, they can look back within that journal to see, well, what did that look like in 1858? And what does it look like now if there's been any change with that physical item? And it's also very satisfying to be able to link up your journal with something in the specimen database. And then the other thing is that a lot of our serials are annotated. So this is also from the Proceedings of the Zoological Society, and is the description of the type specimen of this type of rope squirrel. It was described by J.E. Gray, who was keeper of zoology at the Natural History Museum, and he has annotated the article within the issue with the specimen numbers for that particular specimen, and then also with references to where that specimen appears in other literature. And then this is the kind of unique content that's really, really useful for researchers if they're looking at that particular specimen today, and would be lost if you sort of deduplicate these runs of serials. So for the problems of the future, our next steps for the project, We've nearly finished work on the two major serial collections that are the highest priority. So we're going to be moving on to monograph collections, and then also looking at how we can make use of automation and bulk changes to metadata for those kind of slightly lower priority collections as time passes on the project. And then the other thing about all of this is that we can now issue serials electronically once we've barcoded them, so we can actually begin to monitor usage much more effectively, which is not something we've been able to do.
And yeah, we're also, as I said, trying to think about how to, use this kind of working with the AI team to try and like link things up a lot more effectively. Now we have better metadata. And finally, we're thinking about how metadata displays in our discovery layer. The good thing about this project is it is all encompassing. And so we do have the ability to think from like catalog to shelf to how people access stuff from, and conservation as well. So it is, yeah, it's a privilege, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just saying that I feel like we've already got so many answers to some of the questions we're asking at the museums, but I'll dive straight in with my presentation. So in a recent space review at the National Museums of Scotland Research Library, we calculated our serials take up around 2,100 metres of storage space. I thought that was a lot until I saw Ben and Miriam's slide, and we're at maximum occupancy. To put that in context, 2,100 metres is nearly 10 times the depth of Loch Ness, so we're definitely dealing with a monster. Short of finding a Loch Ness-sized cave somewhere underneath the museum, and it could still happen, we need to take bold measures to release space and enable the growth of our journals in accordance with current collection strengths and research needs. So I'm going to be describing a piece of work in the early stages that's outlining a proposal for how we might test the water on that controversial subject and devise a rationale for serials reading. Suffice to say, we're operating in a museum library environment where our users are understandably very protective and take great pride in the collection and dread seeing anything thrown away. We are a public collection in the sense that we're funded by the Scottish Government, and we do provide reference access to the library for public visitors 3 days of the week. Our main users are our curators and collection-based staff, but less well known is that the museum is also open to fellows of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland by historic arrangement. That's the secret society element of this talk. We're not dealing with Hell's Angels, I hasten to add, but rather the pervasive influence of a scholarly society's collecting habits on the library collection. Print is almost completely dominant in the library, and over the years that's been attributed to staff preference. Yet, like everyone here, we operate in a research environment that's impacted by open access and demand for immediate remote access. So hopefully I can tap between my screens. Not quite sure how to do that. There we go. So say National Museums to Scotland to anyone, and that will conjure up this image of the Grand Gallery on Chambers Street in Edinburgh. We have a single library situated in this building in the University Quarter of the city, and that's within a short walk of the University Library. We're also just a few doors down from the National Library of Scotland, the nation's legal deposit library. And that proximity to the National is something that we've taken into consideration as part of our serials review. Our next door neighbour since the mid-1990s has been the Society of Antiquaries. At around about 95, 96, the Museum and Society libraries merged, and the Society's library moved from the National Galleries of Scotland and it came to us at the National Museums. So as a result of that merger, we continue to receive ongoing archaeology publications via the Society's exchange programme. So it seems to be a recurring theme with museums and galleries. This reciprocal scheme that means that we take in very many international publications in return for the Society's volume of the proceedings. And if you work in a museum or gallery, there's a good chance that you'll have encountered this blue cloth hardback. Because societies are very well connected, very well organised and extremely chivalrous, we receive a lot of donated serials by this route. And this long-standing inherited system of exchanges is now catching up with us 170 years later. It was less of a problem in 1855 when the first volume of the Proceedings was published. But in 2025, we're now needing a new solution to a legacy issue. That sets the historical scene, and this slide just gives you a glimpse into the size and scale of our serials basement store. It's difficult to make journals look sexy, but I think you'll agree my colleague has done a very good job with these photographs. Currently, we're receiving approximately 550 titles. Broadly speaking, half of these are subscriptions through Prenax, and we have about 100 direct subs. So the remainder are received by donation, and that includes 120 exchange titles. Last financial year, we spent nearly double on serials than we did on books, which says something, I think, about the research-intensive nature of the museums, particularly across natural sciences and archaeology, but we do cover multiple subject areas. But even if your serials arrive donated, it's still costly from an estate's perspective to keep all those backruns and for staff to be doing the continuous accessioning and cataloguing. There's the question of sustainability and the museum's commitment to cut carbon emissions. Here are some of our choice titles. For us, the question is, how do we start finding a solution to collection management that respects the museum's heritage without diluting or damaging current research across all subject areas? There must be a place for Mollusk World. Luckily for us, our serials review lands at the same time as the Society are reducing the number of proceedings volumes that they send out. The proceedings are available online, therefore it's not very environmentally friendly to be sending dozens on an annual basis, and don't start me on the cost of stamps. So this presents the opportunity to reduce our serials intake in a collaboration with the Society. Colleagues there have worked with us to compile this master list. I've just got a screen grab of donated publications and their origin, i.e. who in the world is sending us the Saga Book of the Viking Club. We figured it out. So this has allowed us to evaluate the availability of that title next door at the National Library and the rareness of the title within Scotland and the UK. And like Klara, we just used Library Hub. So this matching exercise has been carried out using a simple Excel sheet to link the institution to their serial title. And then we took particular interest in the access type, that's the column F. So for those with good eyesight, you may be able to make out that the Buckshire Museum and Natural History Society is both open access and available at the National Library, while others are only open access but have an embargo, and some are subscription only. So by filtering these columns, we can manipulate that data and kind of evaluate which titles we then want to retain and which will cease due to immediate access online or at the National. The result of our deliberations is this rather swish decision tree. We sat down with the Society and put this together. Crucially, that's how we intend to, we propose to document and defend our collection management principles. And that very objective look at things aims to take the heat out of the conversation and the sort of emotional influence of some of our passionate service users. In a nutshell, we're saying that we will review our back runs of serials donated through the Society that have moved to open access, that's without an embargo, and are also available at the National Library. We'll retain titles that are available at the National and by open access, but which are embargoed. And that will ensure there's always the most up-to-date immediate access at the museums or online at the click of a button. So there's various ways we could play around with that criteria, and I'm inclined to go with the risk-averse approach for now. And if that goes well, applying it to our entire serials collection. From here, we could categorise the collection based on access and identify a short list of titles for each department that we're proposing to deaccession these. Yeah, I think we could consider using some other tools at our disposal to achieve that. The first 2 points are quite self-explanatory, so for time I'm just going to hop over them and focus on collection management guidelines. We do have collection management guidelines for the collection overall that says we'll dispose of ceased or cancelled serials that are available elsewhere. So it's quite a broad statement, and I think maybe we need to, given the size of the collection, consider whether we need a standalone strategy document just for serials. And then rapid ILL, we're trying to introduce this at the moment, and for an institution like us where there's maybe one or two curators accessing one title at any one, you know, that's as much usage as that title may have. Rapid ILL could feed into the review and actually propose a solution. So as in, you know, hooray, look at the service improvement that we're introducing rather than here's what we're taking away from you. So then I think I'm presenting this to you now, but I think the jury's still out on whether this very systematic approach can be applied wholesale across all of our subject areas within a national heritage organisation. The argument for is it's very clear and objective, but it's based on the assumption that access is the main priority. And the argument against is that, you know, when you're dealing with a national heritage collection, there's definitely more nuance required when considering that the serials collection has been collected over decades. And it could become quite, you know, patchy if we just base it on access alone. So I think for that reason, we accept that we'll have to consult with colleagues, but I'd also be really interested to hear if anyone has attempted a more value-based approach across several disciplines and what worked and what was less successful. It's just knowing what to privilege. Is it access? Is it heritage? Is it title completeness? So that we can kind of get on top of a problem that's been running away with us for years. And deal with important backruns. So we'll stop there.